So I want to use this area for two things. One is any routing that I want to do, truss rod channels, pickup pockets, whatever. I want to do most of my routing right here. I've got my routers and sanders above it here. The other thing I want to do here is sand. I've got this little air mover. All I've done here is crudely attach an air filter, and when I turn this thing on, it's just going to be able to suck the sanding dust over into this air filter and get clean air out of here. That's the theory anyway, and it works better than just doing it anywhere else in the shop. And to give you a better idea, that's kind of my main setup bench over there. This is my main woodworking bench, and that'll be my router and sander station. And that'll just be, actually I've got my soldering iron mounted to the wall back there. That'll be kind of where I do electronics work. You know, considering I have all my junk out of there, which it's not currently. So what I'm going to do is use this leftover piece of 1/2 inch plywood. Ideally I think I would use 3/4, but I have this 1/2 inch and I don't think it'll be a problem. So I'm going to use the 1/2 inch. I'm just going to take that jig that I screwed to the table over there and pretty much move it over here, and it'll be my truss rod jig. That'll free up that area. I can use it for whatever I want to do, and then when I do need to route a truss rod, I can just pull the jig out and go over there with it. This little temporary panel, which sort of just acts as a door and hinges back up against the wall when I want it out of the way, which I can't currently fold it back against the wall because this is screwed to the bench. All it does is stop chips from escaping onto the other section of the bench over there. I thought I would show very quickly also how this is used. These bolts, I just attach a socket with a ratchet, tighten them down, and it just squeezes these two pieces of kind of scrap pine up against the neck, holds it in place. This one is of course already done, but what you would do here is use the bolts on each side to push it back and forth to line up the center line of the neck with the center line of the jig on both ends. What I then do is take the router, it goes on top of the jig. I take the router, it sits inside the jig like this. It just stays in line with the center line as I move it along, and it allows me to route a perfectly centered truss rod channel and a neck that's already shaped. Now if your neck blank happens to be a perfect rectangle, like this piece of mahogany, you can do the same thing on a regular router table. This one is built into my table saw. You can run it along with the truss rod bit and put the truss rod channel wherever you want to put it. But sometimes when I buy lumber, like is the case here with this bird's eye maple, if I were to cut this into rectangles, I would yield far fewer neck blanks. I think in this case I got 14 blanks out of 2 pieces of wood, and I think had I not cut them sort of pre-shaped like this, I would have only got 10 or 11. So I'll have to have one more jig laying around the shop, but if it means I yield more guitars out of less wood, then I'm all for it. So yes, this is a little unorthodox, but it will do the job, and it will do the job great. Alright, easy enough. I gained that section back. I decided to run these through the drum sander just to clean up the two edges. This particular edge is not important how the jig works. Only thing it's really going to do is hold that piece of 1/2 inch plywood straight. And it's not really necessary here either, because the router really only needs that one reference surface to be correct, but it's just good practice to build things square, so I did double check that these are square. When I go to attach this later, I want to leave room for a clamp so that it can just be clamped to the edge of the workbench, and that allows me easy access to these bolts. Ideally, I think you would want this toolless. You would get something with a thumb screw. For now, I'm just going to keep using a ratchet, but in the future I may just make some sort of handle for this, or just buy something else that already has a thumb screw. So the jig is pretty simple. You just need that reference surface. Then you need a center line down the middle of the jig that's parallel to that reference surface. And then you need the other side mounted so that it's flush with the width of the router base.
said, a whole bunch of stuff here that doesn't matter. All I'm doing is laying out where that other piece of wood is going to go so that I can determine the final width for the jig itself.
I'm going to need to make a router template soon for a guitar build. This is going to be about the perfect size for that router template. And that is the piece that I'll use for the truss rod jig.
That piece of curly maple right there is going to be the top for that build. When I got everything bolted together, it was just a little tight when the router was passing through the middle of the jig, so I decided to joint those two reference edges that hold the router in place and see if that helped. That did relieve some pressure, but when I tried it, it was still tighter than I liked.
The edge of the router, though, marks pretty clearly a line. So all I'm going to do is take some 220 sandpaper and just take that line off from both sides.
And that should give me a lot more clearance.
I didn't mention this before, so I will now. The two rails that the rider is riding on, those need to be exactly the same dimension. If not, your truss rod slot will be tilted to one side or the other. So it doesn't matter what that dimension is, but they do need to be the same dimension, and they do need to be taller than the neck going in the jig. Here I just measure and mark out the center line. It occurred to me that you could put a V-bit in the router and just lightly score the top of that plywood just to be 100% sure that you have a correct center line. In this case, I did put a V-bit in and just verify that it landed on the center line, but I did not route a channel. So the screws that I was reusing were poking out the bottom. They were a little bit too long. Got a ton of those drywall screws left over from a home improvement project, so I decided to attach these rails from the bottom with those drywall screws in several places so I could remove those longer screws. I tend to live a little on the dangerous side and just kind of freehand it, but it would be pretty easy to bolt on some sort of stop, even an adjustable stop, so that you could be sure you started and stopped the channel at the correct location.
This is not actually the center line, but I'm just giving an example here. Let's say your center line is just barely off. All you have to do is take a little ratchet here to the side, and as you tighten this, you see it moves that over. Using that, you're able to get this thing pretty much exactly centered where you want. The pointed tips of the screws just slightly embed themselves into the pine here. I think I would like to make one last improvement though. And I think what I'll do is take some self-adhesive sandpaper and put it on the insides of these kind of little clamping cauls. And when that's done, I think this thing will hold the neck in place for as long as you need to do your truss rod. It occurs to me too that these can wear out from the tips of the screws getting pushed into them repeatedly and with a fair bit of force. I'm not too worried about that because it's just two scrap pieces. When these wear out, I'll just make another couple. But my guess is that these will last me for years. And guys, it's not like I'm building 1,000 guitars a year. You know, I'm lucky if I get 2 or 3 out a year. I'm just a guy in my basement having fun. Keep that in mind also. Yeah, that's plenty strong. My fake center line lined up. My actual center line lined up. Can lift the neck and the entire jig. That's not going to go anywhere. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, like, subscribe, share, all the normal YouTube stuff. Helps me out a lot. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.